Hi, I thought I'd share with you 5 common mistakes that I find whilst conducting Boilerhouse risk assessments. Number 1 is, not unexpectedly, that the risk assessment I'm preparing is the first risk assessment that's been done. Now, the very best time to prepare a risk assessment on your Boilerhouse is before you've actually built it, because that would then mean that you specify your equipment correctly and you build a Boilerhouse that's fit for purpose. Obviously, you will then need to update that risk assessment whenever there's a major change, an incident, or simply periodically. So typically you might specify annually or every 3 years within your risk assessment, and that would then be your interval. A second common mistake would be the absence of proper training. It's not okay that Bill trains Bob. Training should meet the minimum standard, and whilst we do not have a nationally enforceable standard, the Health and Safety Executive does post a number of signposts that suggest that the Combustion Engineering Association's Boiler Operations Accreditation Scheme is the standard that you should work towards. Now, training obviously is a journey, and you can't start with BOAS. BOAS is very much like the theory test. You need some practical experience, so training should always begin, to my view, with training on your own equipment, on your own site, with experienced people. A third common mistake is inadequate ventilation. Now, people often dismiss boiler houses as hot places because there's a boiler in them, and that may be true where the boilers are perhaps a bit older and the insulation's not so great. But these days, boilers are pretty well insulated things, and more often than not, in a properly designed boiler house, a modern boiler doesn't radiate a significant amount of heat. And actually, a boiler house being too cold is more likely than a boiler house being too warm. If your boiler house is too warm, chances are you either didn't design in enough ventilation in the first place, or perhaps you've changed the way the boilers operate. Maybe you've put bigger boilers into a pre-existing boiler house, or you've gone from having a duty standby situation to having 2 boilers running simultaneously, and that naturally would increase the amount of combustion air required and might affect the choice of ventilation. Number 4, and perhaps the most common mistake that people make, is not considering how the boilers will be monitored whilst there's nobody present. It's perfectly reasonable to have a boiler operating in the same room as people working, and that will then give you a degree of awareness of alarms and things that are going on. But as soon as you leave the boiler house and turn your back on the boiler, you've got to move those alarms to where people are. Now, they don't have to be trained operators. It could be that you take it to a gatehouse, or more likely an engineering workshop. And the person at the other end simply needs to understand that the alarm is important and that you need to raise someone with the necessary experience on the phone or whatever and get them to the boiler house, and them to then deal with the problem. And if they can't deal with that problem in a reasonable timescale, that you will hit an emergency stop button and bring the boiler to a stop. You don't need to be going in the boiler house yourself if you're not suitably trained to do so. And the final thing is water treatment testing. It's not uncommon for people to assume that having an experienced water treatment company attend once a month is enough to ensure you have high quality water for every hour of every day of every week for the rest of the month. Now, when I put it like that, it perhaps suddenly makes you think maybe that's not right. And you'd be quite right to say that it's not right. You need experienced people on site all the time. Your operators need to be trained how to take water samples properly, how to interpret the results, and how to make appropriate changes to your system to ensure that you do have as close as possible to a steady state condition in between times. Now, if you would like some help preparing your own risk assessment, please do get in touch. Otherwise, I will see you next time for another video.